All right, folks, we're here in the Deaf Dome, the Pete Maravich Assembly Center, with a great guy by the name of Patrick Wright, who has been the voice of the LSU Lady Tigers. How long, Patrick?
32 years.
32 years. So the first time that you called an LSU Lady Tiger event, can you remember the game?
Well, I can't remember a specific game, but the first full season was the 1990-91 season. That was a year Pokey Chapman was a senior player, and LSU actually, they only played 9 league games back then. LSU finished 5-4, but their 4 losses were by a combined literally like 7 points. So they were close games. LSU was one of the best teams in the league. They went to a beautiful spot called Albany, Georgia, which I still can't find on a map, and won the SEC tournament. They won 3 games, the SEC tournament, so they were the SEC tournament champions that year, and we're going to play in the NCAA tournament. They were going to be a 2 seed, but Sesame Street Live was booked for the PMAC, so LSU had to forfeit their home game. They had to play in front of 9,000 people at Lamar and lost. And that was something that the late, great Sue Gunter never really got over. She was very bitter about that. There could never be mention of even Big Bird. If you mentioned Big Bird in her presence, she would bristle at that. And I understand, because that was, unfortunately, 30 years ago, that's kind of sometimes where women's athletics were. Yeah. And we've come a long, long way since then. So that was my first full season. As far as the first game, it would probably even have been the year before. You know, KLSU was where I started, the campus radio station, and a lot of it was just, so we'd show up for some home games. We'd call the home, but we decided, me and your old compatriot of yours at Channel 9, Victor Howell. He was also a student at that time, and we got to game. Victor was a basketball player. He had played a little bit at Tulsa and then transferred and came home to LSU. And he was a great color guy. I was the play-by-play guy, and we decided to pitch the idea to Coach Gunter if we start coming and doing some of the road games. The team was having a good year, and I was the shy one. Victor's kind of the outspoken one, so he kind of did most of the talking. But Coach Gunter was so grateful. She's like, yes, absolutely. You guys can ride the bus with us. You guys can do and come and be a part. So the first road game we broadcast was at Mississippi State that year, and Mississippi State was not very good. And we were down a point at halftime, and we came back and beat them pretty soundly. And that's kind of where the whole thing started. And but that was the first full season. So that's been many moons ago.
Yeah, so in the beginning, trying to get the message out, trying to grow the sport, like you said, the sport was so disrespected. Big Bird knocks a great team out of hosting NCAA tournament games in their building. And then back then in the PMAC with the checkered colored seats, the seats weren't the same colors.
They were yellow and bright yellow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a uniform look now. All the seats are purple, but the PMAC and the Superdome were built around the same time, so they kind of had the same look. They both looked like spaceships, and they both had
multicolored seats.
Multicolored seats, but back then there was a curtain, right? Didn't they drop a curtain behind each of the goals, like the equivalent of a tarp in a football stadium?
Right, because where we're sitting, as the fans, because we're sitting on LSU's bench, which is on the same side as the press table. The curtain was actually behind the press table.
Gotcha.
So the grandstand over there, the seats over
which
there,
is much
was
worse.
Open. Yes, it actually was. Yeah. So the behind the baskets were open, but the press table had the curtain behind it, and so that's like saying, okay, hey, look, we know.
No one's coming. Everyone
coming.
goes sit on the same side, so it looks like there's people here.
Yeah, and so we don't have to police the other side. We don't have to have security over there. Everybody kind of go sit over there, and y'all can look at the big curtain while you're watching the basketball game. And that was always another thing that in later years, Coach Gunter and I were able to kind of joke about. But it seems like a little thing, but that was always something that kind of stuck in our craw a little bit too. Yeah. And then that, when we first started really getting the big crowds, when Seimone showed up and we started filling the place up, one of the first things she said to me, the first time we sold out the building was against Tennessee in 2005, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And the first thing when I walked in to interview Coach Gunter before the game, she's like, well, I guess we don't need that curtain anymore. So yeah, you're right, Coach, because if they had the curtain up, half the people wouldn't be able to see the game today.
Yeah. Sue Gunter, I watched her from afar. I started at Channel 9 in 2001, so I guess I covered her for just a few seasons. Yeah. I told Tamika this and a few others, Patrick. She was one of the first ones I can remember. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing. She always remembered your name, and if you ask a question, it was, well, Jacques, blah, blah, blah. Well, Patrick, blah, blah, blah. And and the good ones in this profession do that as well. You know, they make you feel, important, personable.
Well, the few things about her, about Coach Gunter, and I found this out again because as a young kid, I'm 19, and we're, Victor and I are trying to, to get. And I always kind of was a little intimidated about like the coach. She's not going to want us. But it wasn't for her benefit. It was for the benefit of the program and growing the program. She didn't care if her name ever got mentioned, but she was just so thrilled that some people were ready, the media was ready to cover her team. So she was always grateful for that. But I learned great lessons from my parents, of course. But through life, you do run into other people who have an influence on you. And some of the lessons I learned, the main one I learned is, and I kind of made it into a saying, but what Coach Gunter was the best at was be humble in victory and gracious in defeat. Whereas one thing that always stuck with her that she disliked is when, if her team lost and the other coach would say, oh, we played lousy, but she loved giving credit to the other team. Now, quietly at a commercial or something on radio, and she might say, oh, we sucked tonight, but publicly, she wanted to acknowledge good basketball. If a team came in, played well, and beat us, she always was quick to give credit. So very gracious in defeat. And in victory, humble. It's like, well, we played well tonight. Give credit. Those other guys fought it. We were just a little better. Yeah. So that was a kind of a life lesson as a still impressionable 19, 20-year-old that I learned just from watching and being around and seeing how she acted. Because I always thought, hey, sports, it's like you're the good guys, you hate the other guys. It's not like that. You can respect the others, and it works out okay.
Well, I don't know if the parallel, back then, okay, we're in the heyday of Pat Summitt. Pat Summitt and Tennessee, kind of like Alabama football now. They were the ones that you were trying to get over the hump against. And Pat Summitt and Sue Gunter, they had a very good relationship. Yes. Had to be frustrating for Sue to play him so many times. And God, we keep coming up short. But we have video. I think it might have been one of the first time maybe that she beat them, or in a big game right here. I remember her high-fiving people right here at half court. And you told me a story about when it was finally full. And the PMAC seated more people back then. It was 15,000. I think they the capacity.
Well, it was really about 14-2. Yeah. But they did at times. I guess if the fire marshal wasn't working on Sunday, would they up on the concourses up around above the second level would let people stand there. So the attendance, I think, for that first Tennessee game where we sold out was listed over 15,000. But there weren't that many seats in here. There were a lot of people standing.
You said that she had a tear in her eye. Like she came out and she looked at the crowd, like before the team ran onto the floor to take the floor that day.
I'll never forget it. I'm glad I made a point. I'm sitting in my location at half court, and the tunnel, of course, where the team comes out is still back here. And I made a point, when that 3-4 minute mark on the clock before the game, I'm glad I reminded myself, watch her. Because when we talked before the game, I said, Coach, we might have a sellout here today. Today might be the day. She's like, I think it's going to be. And I watched her, and she walked out and just like a kid getting to Disneyland for the first time, just looked around and all the people, and I'm glad. I mean, I still remember it to this day, and because that was something she always wanted to get to, and we came close a couple times, but it wasn't even on a Pack the PMAC day.
Right.
It was a Sunday. It was after a baseball game, so we got a lot of, I think, the last few tickets they were able to sell, they gave people like half off if they had their baseball ticket. But it wasn't a promotion. We didn't give away all the tickets. People paid, and we turned people away. And just the fact that at that point she could say, hey, look, we turned people away. People wanted to come and they couldn't. Like, we never imagined a day where we'd get to that. And we'll all be forever thankful to Seimone Augustus. She started it. Yeah. Seimone was always going to come here, but I've heard the story because Nikki Fargas was the one who was on the Tennessee staff that recruited Seimone to come to Tennessee at the time. Yeah. And I once asked Nikki, I said, Nikki, was Seimone ever really? And she's like, no. It's like she was LSU the whole way.
But on her signing day at Capitol High, she showed up wearing orange.
Yes, because that's, as we now know, Simone's got jokes. Like that's kind of how Seimone rolls. Like she's going to be like, no, I got you all. But that scared the life out of a lot of us when that happened.
Including Sue Gunter, I think. I think she about had a heart attack.
It did, because again, that's how Seimone's a jokester, as we now know. But and again, that's what Nikki told me all the time. She said, no, we knew Seimone was going to stay home. But if for whatever reason Seimone had gone to Tennessee instead of stayed home, that would have been maybe a gut punch that I'm not sure the program would have recovered from. But on the other hand, it got it headed so far in the right direction. I mean, and Coach Burtman said it at the time. He said she is maybe the biggest recruit in the history of LSU sports because of the directions the programs would have gone either way.
Right. I think as a freshman they went Elite Eight, and then
5 straight Final Fours.
5 straight Final Fours. 2 after Seimone left because of players like Sylvia and other players like Kiana Chaney, and I mentioned to Kiana, I remembered, Tamika was so great, but it seemed like they just plugged Erica White in there and didn't miss a beat after Tamika left at point, too.
Yeah, because Tamika is your leader in career assist. Erica White, for a long time, was number 3 on that list. Kayla Pointer just passed her fairly recently, but Erica White is the 4th leading assister in LSU history. She's over 500 because she still had Sylvia to throw the ball to a lot, but she was a great facilitator that I think people do forget about a little bit. But you're right that she kind of plugged in and just kept the thing going like a very well-run machine. She was a good apprentice and learned a lot from Tamika and took this team to greater heights.
Sue Gunter, if you look at the banner on here, it lists a Final Four appearance. Unfortunately, you and I both know she did not coach. Her breathing, she became so weak, right? Her lungs, and she had been a smoker for many years, I believe.
Yeah, right? She had been. And in fact, I guess there came a point in the late 90s probably where I think her doctor said, well, if you don't stop smoking, you're going to die. And she did, she went through a hypnotist, and she stopped cold turkey, and it added probably an extra 10 years to her life. Now the last couple were a little bit rough, but I'd heard of that. I'm not sure I've heard of it working a whole lot, but a hypnotist.
Wow.
So
that's new. I did not know that.
But she was, because her health was starting to fail. But then she did have a lot of good years after that. Like she got around a whole lot better. So by stopping when she did it, it gave her some extra years that she wouldn't have had. Yeah. They were pretty point blank about it. Said you have to stop.
Yeah.
And it made bus rides interesting. But back then we took 8-hour bus rides, and something you don't see anymore. Coaches sitting in the front smoking, or I can't imagine how people got on airplanes and smoked. That was just before our time in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, if you watch the TV show Mad Men, you see those guys. Everyone's lighting up a cigarette at 8, 9 in the morning. They're all pouring scotch or bourbon or whatever, and no wonder people look the way they did in their 40s and 50s. It's maybe.
That's why we still look so good in our late years, right?
Okay. Well,
our mid years, not late years.
Yeah. Well, when they hired me, they said you look like you're 15. Hopefully that'll work out later. And then your friends say, "Oh no, you've aged a lot." So.
Well, there's the ones who have seen you all along too.
You can't win for losing.
They've got before and after pics on you.
They do. And Sue eventually. I remember some of those last press conferences. I mean, she had the wires, the breathing tubes, and everything, and so passed away. Let me ask you this complex subject. I've felt like Pokey Chapman is probably one of the biggest what-if stories in LSU history. If whatever happens doesn't happen off the court, is she still the coach here? How many Final Fours does LSU go to if Pokey Chapman keeps coaching? Does LSU eventually figure it out, win a national title or two? That was always been a kind of a fascinating topic for me.
It would have been interesting because after, because Coach Chancellor was brought in to coach that last Final Four team in 2008, but that team had lost a lot. Mm-hmm. And it was going to take a pretty good rebuilding effort just because the way it finally cycled, that team had a lot of seniors on it. Mm-hmm. Erica White, Sylvia Fowles, just the two big ones. And they had to replace them with a lot of fairly young kids, which they would have had to have done anyway. Whether, no matter who the coach was, they were replacing a big chunk of kids who had been to 4 Final Fours. And I thought the group that Coach Chancellor and his staff brought in, Lysandra Barrett, Taylor Turnbow, and that group panned out pretty well, but it wasn't that same elite level that we had been used to over the previous 5 years. So it is a big what if. And Pokey's back in coaching now. She's back, I think she's an assistant with one of the WNBA teams. I remember once she had told me, and this was, I think, may have been when she was still an assistant. She told me one day that she was going to retire at 45, and she wanted to be a referee. Now, obviously, I think it's not, things change over time. And she's roughly our age. She's early 50s, and she's back coaching. So, but that was something at the point she had a long time ago that she had said she didn't think she wanted to be a coaching lifer, but she's back in it. I thought referee would have been interesting career choice, but that is a one. But they got to that Final Four in 08, and that's, speaking of what ifs, that we went to the Final Four 5 times.
Yes.
The first one against Tennessee, even if we had beaten them, we were not going to beat UConn. UConn was just too good. They ended up beating Tennessee by like 20 plus, the one in New Orleans. So we weren't winning that one.
The fifth one hurt. I don't want to say it hurts the most, because the one they lost to Baylor was
the third one and the fifth one. The Baylor one was when we had it all set up to get Tamika, Sylvia, Seimone are all here. And then Michigan State had kind of done our dirty work for us, because they upset Tennessee in the other semifinal, and it was pretty clear that whoever won the game with us and Baylor was going to clobber Michigan State, and Baylor ended up doing that. But that team, and Coach Mulkey she's told me LSU was the best team by far, and it wasn't even close. Yeah. But it just one bad half where she threw a 3-2 zone at us that we didn't figure out. Shots stopped falling. I mean, you know how it gets in basketball. In 20 minutes, anything weird, because we had a 13-point lead early in that game, and it just kind of dried up. So that's the big what if. And then that fit the last one in Tampa. Yeah. Where
Alexis Hornbuckle, who hadn't scored a bucket the entire game.
Yeah, and we're up.
Gets a rebound and gets a putback.
Well, because we're up. Erica White hits 2 free throws with 7 seconds to go. We're up a point. That team hung its hat on defense. Like, all you got to do is do what you do best. But we let Candace Parker bring the ball up the court, and she made a play, because that's what great players do. But LSU, the team, Stanford had beaten UConn. Stanford had done the dirty work for us in the other game. All we had to do was get there. And then Tennessee ended up winning handily, and they won the championship, which oddly enough is the last time both us and Tennessee have been to the Final Four. Yeah. And hopefully now Tennessee is starting to rise back up a little bit. Their upset loss to Auburn notwithstanding. And LSU's kind of making their, so when you've been around 31 years, you see things cycle. Right. Mississippi State and South Carolina were the doormats of this league when I started this in the early 90s. Well, South Carolina didn't enter the league until the mid-90s. And then they play for national championship, not too long ago. So I've seen it, every program in this league, the ups and downs, and hopefully LSU and I think Tennessee are back on the upswing, and I think the LSU-Tennessee rivalry in women's basketball is a great one. The faces and the names are going to change, but I hope we can get back to some of that. Tennessee.
Kiana Chaney walking.
In fact,
off
there
the
is
floor.
Kiana Chaney.
Yeah. I was talking to her.
She could shoot. She may be the last great pure shooter we had. She could absolutely fill it up from anywhere.
I just visited with her, and she talks to her. She's a head coach at Southern Lab now. She talks to her kids about that game against Tennessee and how little things are big things, and blocking out Alexis Hornbuckle that day.
Because they missed the first layup. Parker found somebody else for a layup, and they missed it. Mm-hmm. But the follow-up, the putback. Yeah. And that one will. That's one I'll never get over that, because that was a ring.
LSU just didn't score that day. The final score was in the 40s. It was like 48-47 or something. It's an ugly game.
It was.
So,
but that's how we played, and we typically won way more of those games than we lost. Yeah. But that game was it was physical. It was LSU Tennessee, because from that period, like 02 to 08, we were the top 2 teams in the conference. We seemed to always meet in the SEC tournament championship game. Right. It always seemed like, and we had some big wins over Tennessee. We beat them in the SEC tournament championship in 05. We beat them a few times here in the PMAC. But it seemed like because my mom tells me this. My mom is the biggest Lady Tiger fan there is. But she loved Summit. She loved Coach Summit. She hated Tennessee, because Tennessee was always in the way of good things. That day when we finally sold it out, we lost to Tennessee by 3 points. Carol Lawson made 2 big shots at the end. When we were going to win an SEC tournament championship, there's Tennessee to beat us. When we're going to win in the Final Four, there's Tennessee. So all the grief that Tennessee caused us, just because sometimes we just couldn't quite get past them. We had some good wins, and we had more losses, unfortunately. But that's because they were what we wanted to be, and we were at their level.
Yeah, this guy's a computer, isn't he? I thought I was a nerd and knew stuff. This guy just spits it out like it happened yesterday.
Now, if you ask me where my keys are right now, I can't guarantee you an answer on that. So I don't always remember the important things.
Well, and then Tennessee too, Rocky Top. You'd hear that over and over and over. They'd always bring their band.
I used to love at the SEC tournament when we would play Tennessee, and our band, they had like a poster, a counter, like the Rocky Top-o-meter. And sometimes it got up to like 10. But then Tennessee carries off the trophy, and then they can play all their Rocky Tops if they got the trophy.
So yeah, and I told Kiana Chaney, I think perhaps the best game I ever saw LSU play in person was in Fresno, California, when they beat UConn to go to the Final Four in Cleveland. I mean, to play UConn, a team of that level, and just skunk them. I think they won by 20.
It was 20 plus, and do you know? That was as we sit here today, now that may change this year, but as we sit here today, that was the last UConn team not to go to the Final Four.
Okay.
They have been to every Final Four since. So your trivia question for the day is, who was the last coach to coach a team that kept UConn out of the Final Four? And the answer is
Bob Starkey.
Bob Starkey. Now, UConn's having their troubles this year. I mean, don't count them out, but they're, in the mock bracketology right now, they're like a 3 seed. Mm-hmm. So, and they've got some people hurt. So this year may be the end, their streak is over, but as of right now, we're the last ones, and that was in 2008.
What I remember about that too was, besides Sylvia Fowles eating their lunch, was the press conference before. Bob Starkey gets up there and is like, poor me, I got to go against Gino Auriemma. He's Gino Auriemma. He's one of these championships. He's better looking than me. He's better dressed than me. Blah blah blah. So Gino gets up there, and I repeat everything that Bob Starkey has just said. He said, "Oh, you're Gino. You're better looking. You're better dressed." And he doesn't even blink. He goes, "That's true. All that's true." And he goes, "But he's got Sylvia Fowles," and that was very foretelling of old Gino.
And it was, but it all came together that night. I'm not sure UConn has lost by that many points in a game since then, but it was over 20, and it made that long ride home from Fresno. And actually what kind of happened there was, that regional was in Fresno, and with the idea that Stanford was going to play there, but Stanford got upset by Florida State on their home court. It was like a 7 beating a 2. So here you are, you've got a regional in Fresno with LSU, Florida State, UConn, and then North Carolina State was the other team. It was the legendary Kay Yow. It was one of her last games as coach. So none of us, I think we were almost like the de facto home team, and we were still like 2,000 miles away.
And there were no fans there.
No, there were very few fans there because it's Fresno and there are no local teams to draw. So it was odd that we had to go that far away to play. And we were the kings of the West Coast back then. We played at Oregon, we played at Stanford, we played, our first Final Four, we beat Georgia in Washington, in Seattle, to go to the Final Four. So they always had a thing for sending us out west.
Yeah.
But I got to see a lot of the world I've never seen before too, so it was worth it. A lot of good memories.
Yeah, I remember going all the way out to Fresno, California for that. Well, it's amazing to me that Kim Mulkey's here. Like, I still am like, did this really happen? Did they pull this off?
I'm that way too, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Like, I finally have settled into, but at first, when I would be doing my pregame chat with her, I would say to myself, I'm talking to Kim Mulkey right now. She's our head coach. Like, it doesn't seem real. It seemed like that whole JR got shot dream sequence, but except this is real. It's real. I've got the T-shirt that says Kim Mulkey's my homegirl. Like, she's here. It's purple and gold. I got it. So it's real. It is real.
Yeah. Those of you who watched Dallas in the 80s there, that whole season, that was a dream. But this is this is real. And wow, as we're sitting here, LSU just beat Kentucky. There were almost 9,000 people here. LSU has already doubled their win total from a year ago. They got 18 victories. The good times are back. She's maximizing the talent.
I want people to appreciate. I know Kayla's getting a 5th year, but last year was kind of short. So, but the point is, she's gotten 5 years. Kayla Pointer is one of the greatest to play the game here. She's the only player and she's over 1,600 points now. I don't think she can quite get to 2,000, but she's going to get close to 1,900. 500 assists, 500 rebounds. She willed the team to victory today. She scores 19 points in the 4th quarter. And I'm so glad that after 4 years of having such small crowds, and especially last year with COVID, that people that she gets to play in front of these huge crowds of people who can appreciate how truly incredible she is. And kids like Jalen Cherry, Faustina Fua, who are also getting to play in front of these big crowds for the first time. But Kayla will be one of the greatest to ever play here.
Mm-hmm. And then, the transfer portal has been a controversial subject in different sports, but certainly no one's complaining about Alexis Morris. She scored 20 today. Very smooth player.
She's just a pure shooter. And she can go from 0 to 15 points in a hurry. She didn't score the first half against Arkansas. She scores 22 in the second half. Now, granted, the game was kind of decided, but I think her getting back in her groove helped her because she got off to a great start here today and scored 15 points in the first half. So it's good that Kayla's got a little bit of help. That's the pure shooter that she hasn't had to dish the ball off to. And you kind of. The portal is just not what you and I are used to. It's not what we grew up with, but you got to use it for what it is. And she brought in a kid who knew her from Baylor and feels like she's turned her life around, and she's been a model citizen and a great player and a great representative for us.
Yeah, those three, and then you throw Ryan Payne in there too. Those four guards with Cherry and Pointer and Morris, the way they run the floor and kind of can push and shoot and everything. They're smaller, and sometimes that's a problem on defense. It was a problem at Arkansas, right? The three-pointers they made. But,
and that's such a tough matchup when you have these three-point shooters and they screen and they run all kinds of crazy stuff. And hopefully if we play those other teams again, we will have learned a little bit from it. And, even though we had to go on the road these last two games, we played so well for so long. In a long season, you're going to have a lull here or there. We didn't play our best. I don't think we played our best today. We played well enough. But what these teams always do for Coach, we haven't had one game, they play hard. 40 minutes, they play hard.
Yeah.
And that's all you ask. And I think the fans who come and see the games, they really enjoy it. They we don't make all the shots, but we play super hard, and the fans love that, and I appreciate it.
We're about to wrap it. They're about to throw us out. We talked a lot about history, and I'll catch up with you later. We'll talk more about the current team, but the whole Kim Mulkey experience has been fantastic. It's been exciting. The fans coming back and everything. I tell people, I'm like, well, how many banquets or different people would pay Kim Mulkey, thousands of dollars to come be the guest speaker, and I get to come listen to her 2 or 3 times a week at press conferences and everything. So it's for me, it's just a great experience.
Well, and our radio shows are a lot of fun. Every week we have new people come to TJ Ribs who we haven't seen before. We get our regulars that come every week, but we got new people who just want to come see what the hubbub's about, and they. Very rarely in life do you get to encounter. Skip Burtman's another one. I could listen to Skip Burtman talk about paint drying, and he would make it interesting, and you know this. And I think Coach Mulkey's the same way. She could get up and talk about, you name the most boring thing in the world. You're going to listen because she's talking about it. So A, it must be important. B, and she's going to entertain you with it as well. And she just touches. She is as country as they come, and she doesn't hide it. She is who she is. I love that she is one of the most, she will tell you the truth. Yeah. She will not give you.
And the players say that too. She's real.
Yes. There's no make-believe. She's not going to dance around the subject. This is what it is, and she's going to tell you about it. So you're lucky. We're lucky that we get to work with a coach that's just fun to listen to, because so many coaches aren't.
Yeah.
So many coaches are I got to go to this press conference, but I bet you look forward to it.
Well, there's a 20-second soundbite with a boring person that feels like 10 minutes, and there's a 1-minute soundbite with somebody who's very interesting.
It's like and you got to condense it. You got to figure out what to cut because it's all so good.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, thanks a lot, Patrick. We'll talk to you again. Patrick Wright, the voice of the Lady Tigers for over 3 decades, and thanks for what you do. There's a lot of people out there, especially in the early days, who could not watch on television at all. And
I feel like they're running me out of business, but it's good to know there are people out there. There are people out there too that haven't figured out how to use the internet.
Your voice gets piped in a lot to those SEC Network online feeds.
I like that too. Yeah. It makes me feel useful again.
There you go. Thanks for dropping by, everyone.
And thank you all.